Welcome to BizGp podcast. Today, my guest is Joshua Lindsey. He is the managing partner of American Business Brokers. Welcome, Joshua.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, give us a little bit of introduction on how your journey began and where you are right now.
So my journey into M&A is a little bit different. I actually took my first company public in 2006. It was in the financial services sector.
Nice.
Yeah, we did prepaid debit cards and ATMs. I had a couple of partners that were older and more experienced than I was. I was the main sales guy, so I was lucky enough to get a little bit of equity. I worked on the road quite a bit. But anyways, that was a good 2 year stint. I really didn't like the public realm. Once you go public, everything's a little bit more restrictive.
Mm-hmm.
But I was able to come out of that with a little bit of cash. And then I started doing acquisitions myself. So I was buying companies, holding them, selling them, fixing them up, etc. So I've got a private equity arm where I still do acquisitions. I've been doing that since about 2008. And then the brokering side came on in 2011. I was getting friends and family or people that I know just asking me like, hey, how are you doing this? Or can you help us value our business?
Mm-hmm.
Where are you getting the money, etc. So I've got the two entities. I've got PHX Private Equity and I've got American Business Brokers.
Mm-hmm.
And it acts as the synergy there is really good because, I'll probably see 100 to 150 deals that come across my desk.
Mm-hmm.
If I like them, I can get involved early on an equity position before those go public.
Mm-hmm.
But the key in private equity is you have to see a lot of deals before typically there's a fit.
Yes.
Otherwise, I just focus on giving really, really strong, representation on the sales side to my clients. So I've sold over 400 million in small businesses in the last 15 years.
Wow.
I average, maybe 20 to 30 million a year, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's about 10 to 12 companies a year.
Nice. That's quite a lot. First of all, congratulations for that. You had some equity, and so you got some cash, and that laid the foundation for where you are right now. So well done.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you started buying companies. So tell us a little bit more about that in terms of what sort of companies you were buying, and what were you doing with them, like in terms, were you fixing them with operations, or were you doing other things like roll-ups, or tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so initially they were value add companies. I was focused on stuff where I could buy a company that I felt like was undervalued.
Mm-hmm.
And so that if I came in there, worst case scenario, if I needed to liquidate assets, etc., I knew that I could get my money back, just at least get my principal back.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would just focus on upside. So like, for example, we bought a furniture business, an online furniture business. A couple of kids that were going to MIT were incredibly intelligent as far as like SEO and keywords, and they had a tremendous amount of traffic for modern furniture. And they got over leveraged. They tried to open up a warehouse, and
Mm.
they had pledged their mom's home like as a personal guarantor. And when things started to unravel and they didn't have the cash to take it down, they sold their online presence for like pennies on the dollar. So we inherited like a massive amount of traffic, right? Like they were getting thousands of dollars of sales um, online, but they just weren't great at organizing and fulfilling. So that's what we put into place. We just put in the infrastructure, got everything under control, so to speak. And we ended up selling that for like 5 times what we bought it for inside of 2 years.
Very nice. Oh man, that's a huge ROI right there for you.
Yeah, I mean, on top of the cash that we made during the time, it was good. I mean, we're not talking about $100 million deals. They were, 7-figure type deals. But when I was early on in it, that's what I would look for is anything that was undervalued where I felt like I could add value based on like sales experience
Mhm.
and then looking to, cash out inside of say 3 to 5 years by just fixing it and putting infrastructure in place.
Got it. And so I'm trying to imagine you're buying this company, and this company could be any in an industry that may be very different from what you are used to. But what you are saying is that you are looking at the layers that are common across all industries like sales, marketing, operations, and if you find a hole there that you can plug in, and if you're good at hiring the right people, then you can make something out of it. You can save a business as well as make money for yourself.
Yeah, pretty right. I mean, like an alternative deal that we did, I bought a dozen Amco transmissions. Are you familiar with the brand?
Amco, yeah.
Yeah, it's a franchise. The husband that owned him passed away and left him to his wife. She had no experience in the space. And so they sold us 12 of those stores for $1 million. Well, the stores themselves, if you want to start one of those franchises, they cost between 150 and 250 to start a new one.
Yeah.
So I already knew that we had value there, right? It was way underpriced. And what had happened in that one is, again, same scenario. We went in, stabilized it, and then we put 3 different packages together: 4 stores over here, 4 stores here, and 4 stores here, which made them more acquirable for buyers. You know, instead of a $10 million deal, we were doing $3 million deals, if that makes sense. So the buyer pool opened up, and once we kept separate books, we were able to piece those off and make a pretty good profit on those as well.
That's an incredible story. And again, so congratulations. Talk a little bit about when you are buying these businesses. I read that you have like 4 different types of valuations. Yeah. So talk a little bit more. I'm familiar with some of them, but I would love to hear your thoughts on how you value.
Yeah, I'm sure you're used to them. When we do appraisals for companies that we prepare to sell, we use multiple different valuation methods, because as we've noticed, buyers, their attorneys or CPAs, they can kind of have their preferred method. And if you don't use their preferred method, then they argue that preferred method, if that makes sense. So we want to make sure that we cover all the bases. So we use EBITDA, as you're probably familiar, EBIT. We do discretionary cash flow. We do rules of thumb, so like industry standard within the space. And then we also do comparisons. We'll go find as many comps in the space as we can. I think that's 5, but we will value them in those areas, so that if a buyer has a preferred way that they like to value the company, we've got enough documentation to validate the asking price and at least hone in on that with supporting documentation.
So you're using comps, which is usually it's from what I understand, it's either EBITDA multiple for bigger companies or SDE multiples for the smaller companies. Maybe you can explain these terms a little bit more and talk a little bit more about the other methods and what the differences are.
Yeah, so obviously we just talked about cash flow. EBIT and EBITDA are nearly the same thing. But general rules of thumb have to do with your industry. So like, for example, if like, we'll just use the transmission shops, right? AMCO would fall into transmissions, but other transmission shops that are independent, or even if you get a broader general rule of thumb, you'd have like mechanic, right? Just like general auto mechanic working on cars, etc. There will be typical multiples in a space where those trade at. And again, there will be loads of documentation that you can rely on just to support a general industry standard. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's one. Another one. And then on the comps, what we're looking for is, the nice thing about comps in M&A is you don't have to, unlike real estate, you don't have to be within like a square mile and within the same, 1,000 square feet like they do on houses. I can pull a comp from Pennsylvania as long as the cash flow is relatively the same and the assets are relatively the same. But relative is kind of like a broad term. So you can't compare, you can't use a comp that's making $2 million in cash flow and then use that as a comp for something that's making $200,000 in cash flow. That's too big of a spread. But like, if it's making $1.6 million and they're doing 2 million, you're close. It might be a little bit of a reach just due to the fact that, once you're in the $2 million cash flow range, that's where private equity or family office will come start sniffing around. So you have to be careful on how much you push it. But if it's relatively close, you can use that. But comps are a good way because markets change. Like, I've been doing this now for 15 years, and I've noticed dramatically that like software as a service businesses can just be hot, right? They'll have like a 3 or 4 year run where they're getting 6x multiples, and then like the next year, a bunch of deals have defaulted, and now they're only getting 3.5 or 4. And those sellers are all disappointed, like, hey, my friend sold for 6. What happened? And you're like, hey, man, the market changed. Like, they no longer look at SaaS like they did, in 2023. Or like logistics was really hot for a while. I sold probably 100 trucking companies in a span of like 7 years. And that's changed dramatically too. At one time, they were incredibly desirable. viewed as almost, recession proof, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And then COVID hit and they dipped a little and then they exploded because of COVID.
Mm.
And now they've gone down into like the 3 or 4x again. Can't really tell you why, but at one point I was selling them at 5 to 6, and now a lot of them are trading at 3. Again, I think a lot has to do with the default rate. As banks, as buyers default on their loans and whatever, banks get skittish, the terms change, or they'll
Mm.
completely get out of the space.
Mm-hmm.
And then that just, accessibility to cash will change multiples pretty quick.
Right. That also makes a difference in terms of the demand and it's
Yeah.
always the credit also, right? What you're saying is the credit availability is a big factor in.
Well, and with logistics too, I think it's wild to think about, but I was saying this 6 years ago, autonomous trucks are coming. We've
Yeah.
already got them. And what's that going to do to the industry? I mean, if you own a trucking company, and you can eliminate your drivers, that's going to increase profitability a lot. But at the same time, maybe companies like FedEx and these other independent agencies, maybe they just bring it all in house. Because
Yep.
right now they'll outsource a lot of stuff to independent contractors.
Mm-hmm.
But once they're autonomous, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if they've got all the packages, what do they need independent contractors for?
That's true. The world is changing. So that gives us a good segue to industry trends, right? Like I think we all are in the presence of these giant changes that are happening in front of us, AI being one, and several other
Yeah.
things related to AI, self-driving car, like for example, right? Or autos or big trucks. So talk a little bit about the industry trends you're seeing and how, for example, let's say that there is an auto repair shop today, their valuation is whatever, 2.5 to 3.5 multiple of SDE. And so talk a little bit more about how that valuation might be impacted going forward in terms of industry trends that you are seeing.
The big question. I think there will be some industries that get heavily affected, like they're dramatically affected. I think there will be others that'll benefit dramatically from it. It's like I said, it's a broad question, but like logistics is a good. I've seen that autonomous trucking stuff coming. The big hurdles for them are insurance. Who's liable, right? If it's
Mm-hmm.
an autonomous truck and it gets into an accident, who's liable? If you're a
Mm-hmm.
giant corporation like FedEx, obviously you don't want to have these, you know, this giant liability where they can sue you. So you could flip a coin and say, maybe FedEx continues to operate their independent contractor model to spread liability across the board, but
Mm-hmm.
they require autonomous vehicles. So that means, a huge outgo of like capital expense. They're going to have to buy all new trucks. They might already have $3 or $4 million worth of semi trucks, and FedEx could just come out and say, hey, if you want to renew with us next year,
Mm-hmm.
you got to completely change over to autonomous vehicles and buy $3 million in autonomous vehicles. And it's like some people won't be able to handle that. So you'll see a flood of those contracts come onto the market, and they'll probably sell for 1x, one and a half,
Mm-hmm.
because they'll be trying to get out because they don't have the capital to expand. But once it stabilizes, and when I say stabilize, let's say 5 years after the trend, if you have one of those contracts, chances are you'll probably be bigger than you were before because you'll be gobbling up all the small guys.
Mm-hmm.
And two, it'll make your business more exclusive. I bet the profitability will increase because of autonomy. And then all of a sudden, those things could be 6x multiples. But you're going to have to probably weather that storm before you'll see that major multiple kick. But again, I'm purely speculating with you,
Sure,
but
I understand.
I understand that space pretty well. I think you'd see a dip and a panic, and then the guys that make it out of it 3, 4, 5 years later, they'll probably be sitting on golden eggs of businesses.
Okay, so what will happen in logistics case? What will happen to all those trucks that are not autonomous? And so their value also goes down. So your asset value also goes down when you're owning something that is not necessarily as employable. It's like an employee whose skill set is currently suddenly out of date or disappeared completely. So what happens to those?
I think there will be like a decade worth of change. And what I mean by that is I think there will still be small independent logistics companies doing like first mile and last mile type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it'll be overnight, but it'll be the big players, a FedEx, a UPS, a DHL, when they, Amazon, when they mandate it, that'll just change like overnight and you'll have to pivot with them quickly. But if you're like a local independent courier, you can probably still use those vehicles in the meantime, but eventually they'll be like a dinosaur. They'll be obsolete. Like you'll need to replace those in order to match profitability in business. So what will happen with trucks? I don't know if they'll just completely go away in the beginning. I think, like I said, I think there could be like a decade bell curve where they phase out. But the reason that they'll phase out will be because of profitability, because your two major issues with trucking are drivers and trucks.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to always have drivers on call to drive. If you solve that issue, one, your payroll and your profitability it just goes way up. And now you just have to focus on maintaining your trucks, which you can do. But again, I just don't think it'll just happen like overnight. I think you'll see these big players mandate stuff. They'll give a couple year runway, or maybe they'll require 60% of your fleet to be electric and you keep 40%, fuel based as backups. Again, I'm purely speculating, but you will see. It's going to happen. I guarantee it's going to happen in some form.
Absolutely. So cool, awesome. So any other industry that you want to talk about? We went into logistics quite a bit. What do you think of, for example, auto repair shops? Because I am looking at some. So what happens to them?
I think as long as there's vehicles on the road that take fuel, I think auto repair will still be needed. I think you're going to see some improvements when it comes to processes and procedures just due to AI and diagnostics and stuff like that.
That's true. Like, okay, so talk a little bit about, let's say that I am a buyer and I come to a broker versus I go on my own trying to find owners, right? So what are the differences in the two options that a buyer has? I know that you gave a seller's perspective to some extent. And what are the advantages of going with a broker and what are the cons of going with a broker?
So I don't do a ton of buy-side representation. Here's why. I require a fee up front. The reason being is in M&A, both parties are responsible for their own fees. It's not like real estate where there's commission split at closing. The seller pays his fees to his advisors, a buyer pays his fees. What I've found is most buyers feel like they're smart enough to just do it on their own. Whether that's true or not is completely up to them, but they feel like they can do it. So I've only done it a handful of times where I'll charge a $30,000 retainer and then a 1% fee upon closing. Now, I feel like it's worth the money. The reason being is part of what I would do is go out and prospect heavily to find them a business within their niche. And if you've tried this, prospecting for businesses is by far the most tedious part of the game. Like, it's not as easy as just being like, oh, I want to buy a mechanic shop. I'll just call this guy and see if he wants. No, it's difficult to get the meeting. It's just difficult all around. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you don't know what the proper add backs are, or you don't know what the multiples should be, you could dramatically overpay for a business. And then once you're in it, you're just having to deal with the chaos.
Yes, that's very true. What I was talking more about, like if I am a buyer and I'm coming to you for let's say that auto repair shop, right? And I guess if that happens, do I still have to pay you to get your deals? Is that what you're saying? Or?
No, on a sales side, I'm just paid by the seller. And again, this is why I think there's an advantage of working through a broker. Our job is to package that deal up so it's very transparent and upfront as to what you're buying. So like if you were to inquire about a business and you sign the non-disclosure, provide proof of funds, you're going to get from me a general overview of the business. You're going to get a full recast. You'll know exactly what the the cash flow is and the EBITDA is. It'll be right there. You won't have to figure it out. It'll be right there. You're also going to have an appraisal to support the price that we're asking. You're going to have a full asset list. You're going to have P&Ls, tax returns, balance sheets, and anything else that I can provide in that initial package. So you're going to get a full business package with everything that you need to make an educated decision as to whether or not you want to make an offer. Once you make an offer, most brokers, if they're good, they're going to have connections with banks to get that financing put in place. All of my deals that I represent, I've already got them lined up for funding before they ever hit the market. Again, just working through an expert, he's going to know where this deal needs to be placed. The rates really don't vary that much because they're, prime plus whatever, but each bank will have a preference on what they like to be in. Some like logistics, some will do restaurants, some like mechanic shops. Like, it'll vary all over the place. And most buyers, in my experience, if they're buying a small business, they typically don't come to the table with a tremendous amount of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I've been a mechanic for 20 years. Now I want to buy this mechanic shop.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as normal as you think. So we've got to get a bank to get on board that you don't have any experience, but we're still going to give you $2 or $3 million to buy this business.
Right.
Like, these are the things that I offer, and but I'm doing it for the seller, but really the buyer's getting a lot of that benefit.
Right. I understand. Tell me a little bit about your business. What is it that is working right now very well, and what are some of the challenges, and what are some of the frustrations that you have that you want to solve?
Yeah, so I'd say what's working well now is, good businesses sell. They always sell.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's a good market, a bad market, whether interest rates are high or low. If it's a good, solid business, I'm not seeing any difference. Like, they're going to sell. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's always going to be buyers out there for good businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the frustrating things that I've seen in the last maybe 3 years, interest rates are higher, out of my control.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing, 5 years ago, I was doing deals in the single digits between 6 and 8%.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're at 10, 11%. So it changes your cash flow models and your ROIs as a buyer, right? And so it doesn't change the valuation of a business, but it changes how much money costs. I'd say another big frustration is I've seen a tremendous uptick in random information online, but primarily through social media, like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. There seems to be just anybody and everybody can be like a guru and give advice about buying businesses. and that's fine, but the problem is it sends a lot of confusing messages to buyers out there. I've seen a huge uptick with buyers just reaching out to me, wanting to buy a business that's, say, listed at $14 million, and they don't have any money. And they think, well, let me just talk to the seller. I can convince him and I'll make payments over time. And I'm like, dude, no one's going to give you their business with no money down and hope that you make payments over time. Like, but there's a lot of stuff on TikTok and Instagram that's telling people, oh, yeah, you can buy these awesome businesses for no money down. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never done a no money down deal. It's never happened.
So tell me, like, where do you want to go from here in the next 6 to 12 months? And what are some of the challenges that you're working on to get there?
The key with NA is like the key with real estate. You just have to stay consistent and you have to stay in the game. Like, I just finished a deal and it took me 18 months to close the deal.
Wow.
Big deal. It was a big deal, but it took a long time. It fell out of contract a couple of times. We worked on it. Finally we found the right buyer and we took it down. But I think where people in this space get into trouble is like, okay, I got to sell a business in the next month or 2 months or whatever. This is a space where you have to play the long game. Like, if you get a huge fee, you need to look at that fee and say, okay, I can live off of that for the next 3 years. And I'm going to stay in the space and just look for great deals to do, whether I want to acquire or whether I want to represent. Because you can go through, I'll go months without getting paid. That's just the truth of it. But then, when times are great, I'll sell a business a month. If interest rates went back to 6%, I'd be flooded with deals and I'd be so busy, just like I was like in the teens. From like 2016 to 2019, I was closing a deal a month, like, without question.
Wow.
But it was, things have changed, right? Things have changed. You got to stay in the game long term. That when that market shifts again, you're in the game, you're already a respected expert, and you can catch that wave.
So anything else you want to talk about to our listeners, who are entrepreneurs and business owners?
I think acquiring a business is a great way to build wealth. My advice to anybody out there doing it is you really want to hone in your search and kind of come up with a cash flow metric of something that you want to make after debt service, and then try to focus on an industry where you can add some value, right? It doesn't mean you can't buy a business that you have no experience in, but the likelihood of you being successful, if you've got some skills that you can apply immediately into the space, you're much more likely to succeed taking that over and then applying some skills. And again, I've had a lot of success where I bought companies, I've applied my own skill set, and then in a couple of years, been able to sell it for 5 times what we bought it for. That's my general rule of thumb. Look for stuff that's undervalued, where you can add value into it, and then don't be afraid to work. Too many people just want to buy something and just like do nothing. It's not a realistic way to make money. Like once you buy a business, get excited about getting your hands dirty in it and really try to improve it as much as you can and set yourself up for a pretty solid exit. Because it can be 7 and 8 figures if you do it right.
Right. And talk a little bit more about, before we close on, like, how do you increase the value of your company's exit? What do you do?
A couple of things that you can do. Well, a few key points. One, keep really good books and financials. Okay. Don't get really messy with your ad backs. Don't buy a boat and put it into marketing. Like keep the business clean. You're better off setting a separate entity over here and paying yourself, but keep that business's entity financials really, really clean. So it's really transparent for a buyer, but also for a bank. So it's just can be bankable the day you want to sell it. Nice books. The second thing that you can do is work over time to build a business that can operate without you. You don't want it to be vital and resting on you. You want to build up infrastructure in place over time. And this is what can take that 3 to 5 years. Getting a general manager or a CEO or whatever it may be, but you want to put in some infrastructure so the new buyer, if he's going to pay you $6 or $10 million for this business, he knows that he gets the infrastructure with it. And that everything should remain, continue on seamlessly without, like, you can demand a much higher price for businesses with infrastructure than just off of cash flow. Like you can really push that narrative a lot. And then obviously the third one is improve profitability. Look for ways to improve profitability, but cash flow metrics are the real driver. The more cash flow you're kicking off, and there's different metrics in the sense that the multiples will go up from 250 to 500, 500 to $1 million. So those cash flow metrics are definitely a way to improve value. But any 3 of those things, you can add value. Clean books, infrastructure, or improving cash flow. Even if you just do one of them, that valuation should go up in the next 2 to 3 years.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah. So thanks a lot. Those are great tips and for our listeners. Okay, cool, Joshua. I'll see you around. Thanks a lot for joining our podcast. Okay.
Yep. We'll see you soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.